Hello, and welcome to Reading Little Blue Books Aloud, or Out Loud. These are little blue books. As you can see at the top of the book it says Little Blue Books. This happens to be book number 813, Contemporary American Philosophers, Santayana, James, and Dewey, written by Will Durant, PhD. This is part 5. We left off at the end of James, and we are starting Dewey. Part 3, James Dewey. Chapter 1, Education. After all, pragmatism was not quite an American philosophy. It did not catch the spirit of the greater American that lay south and west of the New England states. It was a highly moralistic philosophy and portrayed the Puritanic origins of its author. It talked in one breath of practical results and matters of fact, and in the next it leaped with the speed of hope from earth to heaven. It began with a healthy reaction against metaphysics and epistemology, and one expected from it a philosophy of nature and of society, but it ended with an almost apologetic plea for the intellectual respectability of every dear belief. When would philosophy learn to leave to religion these perplexing problems of another life, and to psychology these subtle difficulties of the knowledge process, and give itself with all its strength to the illumination of human purpose, and to the coordination and elevation of human life? Circumstances left nothing undone to prepare John Dewey to satisfy this need, and to outline a philosophy that should express the spirit of an informed and conscious America. He was born in the Effet East, in Burlington, Vermont, 1859, and had his schooling there, as if to absorb the old culture before adventuring into the new. But soon he took Greeley's counsel and went west, teaching philosophy at the universities of Minnesota, 1888 through 89, Michigan, 1889 through 94, and Chicago, 1894 to 1904. Only then did he return east, to join, later to head, the Department of Philosophy at Columbia University. In his first 20 years, the Vermont environment gave him that almost rustic simplicity which characterizes him even now that all the world acclaims him. And then, in his 20 years in the Middle West, he saw the vast America of which the Eastern mind is so proudly ignorant. He learned its limitations and its powers, and when he came to write his own philosophy, he gave to his students and his readers an interpretation of the sound and simple naturalism which underlines the superficial superstitions of the providences of America. He wrote the philosophy as Whitman wrote the poetry, not of one New English state, but of the continent. Dewey first caught the eyes of the world by his work in the School of Education at Chicago. It was in these years that he reveled in the resolute experimental bent of his thought, and now, 30 years later, his mind is still open to every new move in education, and his interest in the schools of tomorrow never flags. Perhaps his greatest book is Democracy and Education. Here he draws the varied lines of his philosophy to a point and centers them all on the task of developing a better generation. All progressive teachers acknowledge his leadership, and there is hardly a school in America that has not felt his influence. Even distant Russia sends an official invitation to him as the foremost educator in the world, to come and help reorganize its shattered schools and its impoverished universities. Following up Spencer's demand for more science and less literature in education, Dewey adds that even the science should not be book learning, but should come to the pupil from the actual practice of useful occupations. He has no great regard for a liberal education. The term was used originally to denote the culture of a free man, i.e. a man who never worked. And it was natural that such an education should be fitted rather to a leisure class and an aristocracy than to an industrial and democratic life. Now that we are nearly all of us caught up in the industrialization of Europe and America, the lessons we must learn are those that come through occupation rather than through books. Scholastic culture makes for snobbishness, but fellowship and occupations makes for democracy. In an industrial society, the school should be a miniature workshop and a miniature community. It should learn through practice and through trial and error the arts and discipline necessary for economic and social order. And finally, education must be reconceived, not as merely a preparation for maturity, whence our absurd idea that it should stop after adolescence, but as a continuous growth of the mind and a continuous illumination of life. In a sense, the schools can give us only the instrumentalities of mental growth. The rest depends upon our absorption and interpretation of experience. Real education comes after we leave school, and there is no reason why it should stop before our deaths. I agree with that. Chapter 2. Instrumentalism. What distinguishes Dewey is the undisguised completeness with which he accepts the evolution theory. Mind as well as body is to him an organ evolved in the struggle for existence from lower forms. His starting point in every field is Darwin. When Descartes said the nature of physical things is much more easily conceived when they are beheld coming gradually into existence than when they are only considered as produced at once in a finished and perfect state, the modern world became self-conscious of the logic that was henceforth to control it, the logic of which Darwin's Origin of the Species is the latest scientific achievement. When Darwin said of species what Galileo had said of the earth, pure si manove, he emancipated once and for all genetic and experimental ideas as an organon of asking questions and looking for explanations. Things are to be explained then, not by supernatural causation, but by their place and function in the environment. Dewey is frankly naturalistic. He protests that to idolize and rationalize the universe at large is a confession of inability to master the courses of things, I believe, that specifically concern us. That must be. He distrusts, too, the Schopenhauerian will and the Bergsonian elan. These may exist, but there is no need to worship them. These world forces are as often as not destructive of everything that man creates and reverences. Divinity is within us, not in these neutral cosmic powers. Intelligence has descended from its lonely isolation at the remote edge of things, whence it operated as unmoved mover and ultimate good, to take its seat in the moving affairs of men. We must be faithful to the earth, like a good positivist scion of the stock of Bacon and Hobbes and Spencer and Mill. Dewey rejects metaphysics as the echo and disguise of theology. The trouble with philosophy has always been that its problems were confused with those of religion. As I read Plato, philosophy began with some sense of its essentially political basis and mission, a recognition that its problems were those of the organization of a just social order, but it soon got lost in dreams of another world. In German philosophy, the interest in religions religious problems deflected the course of philosophic development. In English philosophy, the social interest outweighed the supernatural. For 2 centuries, the war raged between an idealism that reflected authoritarian religion and feudal aristocracy, and a sensationalism which reflected the liberal faith of a religiously progressive democracy. The war is not yet ended, and therefore we have not quite emerged from the Middle Ages. The modern era will begin only when the naturalist point of view shall be adopted in every field. This does not mean that mind is reduced to matter, but only that mind and life are to be understood not in theological but in biological terms, as an organ or an organism in an environment, acted upon and reacting, molded and molding. We must study not states of consciousness, but modes of response. The brain is primarily an organ of a certain kind of behavior, not of knowing the world. Thought is an instrument of readaptation. It is an organ as much as limbs and teeth. Ideas are imaginative contacts, experiments, and adjustment. But this is not passive adjustment, no merely Spencerian adaptation. Complete adaptation to environment means death. The essential point in all response is the desire to control the environment. The problem of philosophy is not how we can come to know an external world, but how we can learn to control it and remake it, and for what goals. Philosophy is not the analysis of sensation and knowledge, for that is psychology, but the synthesis and coordination of knowledge and desire. Coffee break. To understand thought, we must watch it arise in specific situations. Reasoning, we perceive, begins not with premises, but with difficulties. Then it conceives any hypothesis which becomes the conclusion for which it seeks the premises. Finally, it puts the hypothesis to the test of observation or experiment. The first distinguishing characteristic of thinking is facing the facts. Inquiry, minute, and extensive scrutinizing observation. There is small comfort for mysticism here. And then again, thinking is social. It occurs not only in specific situations, but in a given cultural milieu. The individual is as much a product of society as society is a product of the individual. A vast network of customs, manners, conventions, language, and traditional ideas lies ready to pounce upon every newborn child to mold it into the image of the people among whom it has appeared. So rapid and thorough is the operation of this social heredity that it is often mistaken for physical or biological heredity. Even Spencer believed that the Kantian categories or habits and forms of thought were native to the individual, whereas in all probability they are merely the product of the social transmission of mental habits from adults to children. In general, the role of instinct has been exaggerated, and that of early training underrated. The most powerful instincts, such as sex and Sometimes these pages hard to get apart. Sex and panacity have been considerably modified and controlled by social training, and there is no reason why other instincts, like those of acquisition and mastery, should not be similarly modified by social influence and education. We must unlearn our ideas about an unchangeable human nature and an omnipotent environment. There is no knowledgeable limit to change or growth, and perhaps there is nothing impossible, but thinking makes it so. Chapter 3. Science and Politics. What Dewey sees and reverences as the finest of all things is growth, so much so that he makes this relative but specific notion, and no absolute good, his ethical criterion. Not perfection as a final goal, but the ever-enduring process of perfecting, maturing, refining is the aim in living. The bad man is the man who, no matter how good he has been, is beginning to deteriorate, to grow less good. The good man is the man who, no matter how morally unworthy he has been, is moving to become better. Such a conception makes one severe in judging himself and humane in judging others. And to be good does not merely mean to be obedient and harmless. Goodness without ability is lame, and all the virtue in the world will not save us if we lack intelligence. Ignorance is not bliss, it is unconsciousness and slavery. Only intelligence can make us sharers in the shaping of our fates. Freedom of the will is no violation of causal sequence. It is the illumination of conduct by knowledge. A physician or engineer is free in his thoughts or his actions in the degree in which he knows what he deals with. Perhaps we find here the key to any freedom. Our trust must, after all, be in the thought and not in the instinct. How could instinct adjust us to the increasingly artificial environment which industry has built around us, and the maze of intricate problems in which we are enmeshed? Physical science has for the time being far outrun That doesn't make sense. Physical science has for the time being far outrun physical. It's the same word. We have mastered the physical mechanism sufficiently to turn out possible goods. We have not gained a knowledge of the conditions through which possible values become actual in life, and so are still at the mercy of habits of haphazard and hence of force. With tremendous increase in our control of nature and our ability to utilize nature for human use and the satisfaction, we find the actual realization of ends, the enjoyment of values growing unassured and precarious. At times it seems as though we were caught in a contradiction. The more we multiply means, the less certain and general is the use we are able to make of them. No wonder a Carlyle or a Ruskin puts our whole industrial civilization under a ban, while a Tolstoy proclaims a return to the desert. But the only way to see the situation steadily and see it whole is to keep in mind that the entire problem is one of the development of science and its application to life. Morals, philosophy returns to the first love of the wisdom that is nurse of good. But it returns to the Socratic principle, equipped with a multitude of special methods of inquiry and test, with an organized mass of knowledge, and with control of the arrangements by which industry, law, and education may concentrate upon this problem of the participation by all men and women up to the capacity of absorption in all attained values. Unlike most philosophers, Dewey accepts democracy, though he knows its faults. The aim of political order is to help the individual to develop himself completely, and this can come only when each shares up to his capacity in determining the policy and destiny of his group. Fixed classes belong with fixed species. The fluidity of classes came at the same time as the theory of the transformation of species. Aristocracy and monarchy are more efficient than democracy, but they are also more dangerous. Dewey distrusts the state and wishes a pluralistic order in which as much as possible of the work of society will be done by voluntary associations. He sees in the multiplicity of organizations, parties, corporations, trade unions, etc., a reconciliation of individualism with common action. As these develop in importance, the state tends to become more and more a regulator and adjuster among them, defining the limits of their actions, preventing and settling conflicts. Moreover, the voluntary associations do not coincide with political boundaries. Associations of mathematicians, chemists, astronomers, businesses, corporations, laborers, organizations, churches are transnational because the interests they represent are worldwide. And I think we'll stop there.